Hi everybody, I'm from Alessandro Lonero and we are at the new episode of PerformanceQuest with my co-host Francesco Cuzzolin and my guest of today, Kid DAmelio. He don't need presentation, but I will try to introduce himself the same. He's performance specialist at Nike. He has worked in many facilities. He has worked in Boston Celtics, Toronto Raptors. He has been strength conditioning coach at Stanford University. Whoa, Kit, if you want to add something at your description, we are happy to be with you today.
Yeah, no, I can't thank you guys enough for having me. Looking forward to our conversation. As you said there, the background's a little kind of crosses some bridges and spans a good deal of time. Although, as Kutzo was saying, I still look young, but some years under my belt. And you know what it has is exposed me to a lot of different things and ideas. A lot that I think we'll talk about here today. But from both the collegiate reigns at Stanford to professional to now a corporate kind of setting. Even though I still sort of work a little bit like I did in professional sports, but kind of covers the gamut. And the same as my background, right? With the Celtics, I was more on the medical side, realized that's not what I wanted to do. So transitioned more into the performance realm. And that's where I was with the Raptors and kind of since then. And then recently added my PhD in applied sports science. So kind of combining all three areas that I think are key to an athlete's, optimized performance.
Oh, great. I'm really happy and excited to have a kid today. And like you say, you got a professional age that is around 110 years, but his age is still growing like all the best professional in the world. So it doesn't matter what you have done. It's very important what you're supposed to do and which is the process that you are thinking to follow, to increase the quality of your job. When you are so passionate about what you're doing, you never stop learning. So this is why I'm really happy to have a kid. Once again, he has across experiences, in like you say, professional teams, corporate. So this experience is very challenging. And this is why the topic for today that I'm really happy to share with Kit is technology and sport performance, if they are friends or foes. So this is the topic that we are facing today. So I'm going to start with the first question, Keith. Like you say, you have worked in many top-level sport professional organizations, which were the basic, in your opinion, I'm always trying to get from our guests their personal experience. So
sure.
Which were the basic principles that you did apply to consider or not technology in your daily job from your former experiences?
Yeah, I think, really always trying to take it back to first principles, right? Like, what am I trying to solve, right? Like, what questions am I trying to answer? And I know people, especially in 2021, right, want to jump right to a shiny toy or jump to the latest technology without really having a clear structure in place to see if that technology actually going to help them answer the question that they have, right? That's assuming that they do even have a question. They're not just using it for the sake of using it. But then it even goes a step further in terms of, okay, let's say the technology is going to help you. Does it actually work in your setting? Which is, I think, a step a lot of people miss. And for me, throughout my stops along my professional journey, I've always sort of taken it back to that of hey, what am I trying to understand? And if it has to go beyond what either I can do with a piece of pen and paper or something, more rudimentary, if you will, then I look to what technologies can help me. And there's probably no better example than at Toronto, right? And we're going back to 2005, 2006. This is far before technology was just used, ad hoc with teams. And I really wanted to understand what my athletes were going through from a physiological perspective and in a workload perspective. And this is before Catapult and any of the sort of wearable sensors from that perspective. So I had our team where, real-time heart rates, we used, First Beat in Sunto at the time in pretty much every practice. And then I And then I really wanted to understand, in part, I step back for a second, because I also wanted to have a better conversation with our coaching staff about planning practices and understanding what that process looks like. And then I went a step further to, okay, I understand what a practice looks like, but is that what a game looks like? And so I took it a next step, and I had our athletes illegally, I am fully admitting now, wear the heart rate monitors in game, right? I had our starting five wear heart rate monitors in game. I did maybe every other week just to kind of get a snapshot to see like, okay, how do they look in a game? And is that representative of what we're doing in practice? And then what I'm doing from a training perspective as well, because, I think one thing that certainly young professionals maybe have a overly optimistic view of is that they will influence practice a great deal. It's not always the case. And it's certainly not the case in a lot of US professional sports. So what can I control and what can I influence? And that was sort of my impression or impetus to use technology. And then from there, it just sort of led me down a little bit longer path of, okay, I now start to understand that, but how are my athletes adapting? How are they looking? And that's when we started to do, sleep monitoring. And again, we're talking 2005, 2006. Now it's really popular the last 5 years to do sleep monitoring. And we were doing it back then because I just wanted to understand, like, what does it look like? And for nothing else, in all honesty, it allowed me to have a better conversation with the athletes, right? It just allowed, because then you had athletes, I could actually show something tangible and have a deeper conversation about their recovery, about sleep. Why is this important? And then if we made some changes, they could actually see it change, not only feel it change, hopefully, but then see some of the information change that we were collecting. And it really, led me to kind of think about things a little bit differently from the standpoint of educating my athletes, right? And that's really what I would say. Yes, I want to use technology to help understand things and get better and help my athletes, perform at their best. But then also sometimes just use it to really engage with my athletes and help drive conversations that I want to have with them.
I cannot be more agree with you. I like and I consider technology just when technology is solving some problems. Sometimes technology can give you problems. So
yeah.
Go.
I was going to say with that, like, and I only stop you there for a second because you almost finished the statement. But one of my best friends, Patrick Ward, who's with the Seattle Seahawks, one of the smartest guys I know. He said a number of years back to me, we were having a conversation very much like this. And he said, look, technology doesn't solve problems. People solve problems, right? Exactly. And like there couldn't be, I try and, reiterate that whenever I can, especially if I'm talking to young professionals, but even old ones too.
No, absolutely. So this is one of my, let's say, principles. And the second one is I'm taking under consideration just technology that I can use consistently. Not just once in a while. I don't like to give a sign to my players that I'm doing some, let's say, trials with them, and I'm trying to clear my mind. This is not my approach. This is, in my opinion, cannot be an approach, mainly in the sport professional field. So I like to once again give importance to the system. So which is the method that I'm trying to apply. So sleeping quality. It's a data that I want to monitor consistently. So it's something very important for me. And information that I'm getting can help me to make some changes, or it's just to get this conversation with my athletes. So when I'm using technology, I'm really using. I'm trying to get all the best from the technology that I'm putting on the field, but I'm not the kind of guy that can be easily convinced that the new shiny tool is the best way, to increase the quality of your job. I think our quality is from the system, from the method, it's an holistic approach to training methodology. I don't know if you agree with this.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's exactly the way I look at it, right? Like, does it fit into the ecosystem in the structure that you have in place? If it does, great. If it doesn't, that's fine. And that's fine if every other team is using it, but it doesn't fit into the way I want to approach and think about performance. I also, you said there, kind of bouncing around between technologies and, let's try this week and let's try this week. that tells me you really don't have a plan. When I see professionals do that, like they're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. I also think that really damages, even if they don't say it, but it subtly damages the confidence athletes have, right? And if they, because athletes are smart, right? They see, and if they see you constantly bouncing around, I inherently think like, okay, what are we actually trying to accomplish here? Athletes inevitably think that as well. Because the other thing I see with technologies in a lot of pitfalls that people who implement them use, and usually it's the people who are bouncing around from technologies, is, okay, you've collected this information, right? And to me, if I'm an athlete, right, if I just put that hat on for a second, that tells me that you believe there's something valuable in this. But if there is no change in what we do based on that information, how am I, then why are we collecting it? Yeah. And I think that a lot of times technology can actually like deteriorate the confidence athletes have in what you're trying to do unless it's used appropriately.
And once again, I'm really believer, like you say, people solve problems, not technology. For me, tracking, I don't know, any kind of metric, it's a way to reduce the amount of mistakes, because I'm taking under consideration some numbers, in an objective way. But the last word, the last choice is mine. Okay, is coach's choice. It's never, okay, I saw that your recovery from any kind of device is not perfect, so I'm deciding from the device that you can save some practice time. No way. I like to take this metric, this data under consideration, but let's talk about how important it is, how the data is, objective. And the last word is always from coaches. If you show that technology is driving your choices, you show weakness. Okay, I want to have a lot of information to take the best decision possible. But once again, it's the coach's decision. It's not the technology decision.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's jump inside a little bit more nowadays, and like we know, like you mentioned before, also some companies, technology is used mainly to quantify training process, gathering information about internal load, external load, the lifestyle, well-being, and etc. So, from your experience, in which field we have had the biggest evolution, let's say in the last 5 years, more or less?
I think really it's being able to quantify what they're doing in sport, right? Like regardless of the sport, right? I think some of the advances, whether it be with, accelerometers and the accuracy of some of the local positioning systems, right? Like I think they've just lend itself to really understand the game demands a little bit better, right? Like what is actually, and that was actually,
let me make one question, because sure. I can present you also the situation. Like you say, knowing exactly, let's say, the performance model, it's important for all of us, And just seeing that just few federation did decide to share the technology. Okay, let's make an example. We decide that time is important for us, and we decide that the watch is a perfect technology for us. So if we decide the performance model is important for all the teams, why we don't share one technology? Okay, I mean,
no, you're right.
Really easier. You in Europe now, you got teams that are taking their own ways, using one technology, another one, metrics a little bit different. Algorithms that are taking information are different. So if we don't decide that the metrics are are objectives, we cannot talk the same language, I don't know if it's the same in the USA pro sports.
It's moving that direction, right? Like, so I am, the NFL uses a standard local positioning system for in-game, right? But then you have practices and teams, some teams use a different one, which I don't understand. Like, why would you want a different technology for practices than games? But they do. The NBA is a little bit all over the place, and I sit on the NBA's wearable technology committee. So that is one of the things that we're actually looking at, not only validating and examining the technologies that teams implement with their athletes, but also looking at, are we going to have a uniform system, right? Where every team uses it in game and then in practice as well. So you would have a uniform data set of the entire league. And in part, I think that serves the field very well, because like you said, now you're all looking at the same thing. Mm-hmm. How that's interpreted could be very different, right? Depending on the situation. And that's fine. But I think, the closer we get to a uniform measurement tool, again, assuming it's the best, and the better the field is, but also the better the athlete is. Because, as we move into the age where all of this information is collected on athletes, like, it's their data. And as they move team to team, if it's a uniform system, they're now consistently looking at the same data. Not, in Boston they're collecting Catapult, and then they get traded and they go to Charlotte, and now they're collecting, Connexon, and then they get traded in Cleveland, and now they're collecting something else. Right? There's a uniform data set that follows them throughout their career, which I think has a level of importance that's a little bit underestimated right now.
Do you think, because this is a topic we are talking also in Europe, and do you think that this kind of request should be done from teams, should be done from, players association, should be done from, coaches association? Because, someone got to make the first step, asking to, the federation, example, the league, to share this information, because it will be easy also to make an investment, because we're going to buy like 20, 30 systems or to 18, depending from the teams. And it's a different approach, So it's a wild west right now in Europe. I'm a little bit worried because you are still discussing if it's important or not. So if you're talking with coaches, say absolutely, it's absolutely 100% important. But nobody is making the first step. So
no, I think it needs to be players association driven. Now, maybe I'm also biased because I'm helping the players association drive theirs. Right
in Europe, so we are on the same. This is why I was ask you, because I know that you are more or less in my same situation, and I'm trying to ask, let's say endorse this request, because it's very important.
I think the federations, and I know it might be a little bit different structure overseas than it is in the US, like in it, because if we say federation, like at least NBA, we're talking the league, and the league is nothing more than owned by the owners of the individual team, right? Like they're overseeing them. So it's not really the same as saying the league driven, because then that's just a collection of teams. And I think the problem you have it being team driven, which is a problem in sport, is right. Everyone thinks they're doing something special, right? So a team isn't going to say like, oh no, yeah, we should all have the same, because they think what they're doing is way better than the other team.
Yeah,
which,
they want to be the smartest in the room,
Exactly. Exactly. They have like the worst comment I hear is like our secret sauce. Bullshit. Like there's, like you might be looking at something a little bit differently, and that's fine, but I don't care if they're doing the best thing in the world. It wouldn't work in any other situation than the situation they have. Right? Because of the management, coaches, athletes, that organization is unique to all of the other organizations. So when, and that's the problem, I think, with it being team driven, is because every team wants to be an individual. They don't want to be a collective because they think what they're doing is so unique and so different. So I think it has to be driven by the players. And fortunately, that's who I'm trying to help drive that, because I do think it is important.
No, let's try if we can, to put together our strength, because I'm absolutely on your same page. And I really believe that monitoring the external load is very important, to manage players in the best way. So they should be involved in this kind of decision, like asking, to the league, for example, to share a kind of technology during games, and after teams can make their own decisions in their own facilities, because in any case, they have their own houses, so they can do in their house whatever they want. So.
And that was, that was, in all honesty, my PhD, right? Like I looked at multiple seasons worth of game data, and which really no one had looked at before from a physical activity standpoint, right? And started to then quantify what does an NBA game, week, season upon season look like with some of these physical activity measures. What is the forward position, the center, the guards, and start to get a little bit granular about these activity profiles it found in the NBA, and then how do they actually how do they vary from game to game, but then also what factors influence them, right? We've talked about it for a year. I'm sure, you heard it in the years you were in Toronto. It was like, oh, when you play in Denver and Utah, like the altitude, that really affects it.
It's true.
Well, has anyone ever looked at it? So that was one of the factors I looked at to actually see, does it actually affect physical activity and things like that. And then the interesting one is, I did one really interesting study, at least interesting to me. We'll see once I publish it if it's interesting to everyone else. Is actually can you project and forecast physical activity based on some of these factors, right? Everyone wants to get into like, predictive analytics and things like that, but I sort of took it from the standpoint of, if I know this about my players and the factors that they're playing home, they're going to win or lose, they're playing in Denver, let's say. Can I forecast what their physical activity load profile will look like based on that information? And actually with pretty good accuracy, you can, right? And does that lead, like you said, they're monitoring workload, like does that lead to a better way to actually know when you should rest a player or when you should, scale back? And maybe it's not in a game, right? I'm always very, very cautious about talking about like giving a player a game off or like doing something in game time management, because that's what they're that's what they're paid to do, right? And look, for some of the athletes, especially in the NBA, but you could say this across any sport, is I'll take LeBron James at 60% than some players at 100%, right? So it's less about what can I do in game to affect and reduce LeBron's workload, but what can I do outside of those games, right? And that's where I think as professionals, we need to maybe think about a little bit more, because, the last thing a coach wants to hear is like, hey, give LeBron a night off tonight, right? Like they want LeBron to be there to help them win. So what can we do about things? But I think back to what I was saying with my study is, I think it might actually give us a better way to look at, how we're approaching workload management, because right now it's like, oh, we played a back-to-back, we'll just give him the second night off. Mm-hmm. Well, why? What if that third game that's actually on the fourth night, he's actually forecasted to do his heaviest load? Maybe that's the game you should give him off. So things like that is what I was examining in my PhD.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And please keep me in the loop, because we can share a bunch of information. And in Europe, it's a little bit different because game density is different. So we are practicing a lot more than in NBA. And this is why we have a kind of time to manage a player in a better way, So monitoring what's happening during the game and during the week, you can decide, when is the heavy practice, when it should be a kind of tapering inside the microcycle. So I'm doing, that I'm working like performance manager, and this is what we are doing. We try to monitor any effort, any session, and like team session, like individual session. And deciding from how many minutes the players usually play the game, we can decide, which is the individual microcycle inside the team microcycle. So this is a step. And, if you are playing once a week, it's very simple. So like just the Italian league. If you're playing twice, like also a Euro Cup, or in any case, a European Cup, you play twice. So you have a kind of room to manage the situation. And which is the problem now? That now many games are postponed, so the density of games are increasing, and we are really close to the NBA density in some weeks, not for the whole season. And sometimes we are in trouble because we don't have business traveling. We don't have all these advantages that are planned in NBA to save the huge amount of games that they are putting on the floor. So this is the main difference. But if we can join our experiences, because many NBA players are coming to play Europe, and the opposite. Many European players are coming to play in NBA. We could create, bot scenarios, considering what we can do and what we cannot do. So please, once again, congratulations for your PhD. It's very interesting and an important topic for the future. And keep us in the loop, because we can share very important information about deciding what to do for the future. So let's make.
I think it's a problem in a lot of sports, right? So not just basketball, although basketball is obviously you're in my wheelhouse, but even in with some of the athletes I work with in other sports, NFL and different things, like it's really interesting how they approach workload management.
Soccer in Europe is a huge, it's a huge professional level. They are playing so many games. They have national teams, so all the top players are playing also national teams during the season. So they stop the leagues to play national teams games that are very, very important to qualify for the World Championship, for the European Championship, or so on. So very, very not easy, to decide turnovers, to decide load management is very important topic. So about the future. So same question more or less.
Just to say that we have 7 games in 3 weeks. We are playing tonight. We have 7 games in 3 weeks.
Okay.
Interesting. It's like NBA, right?
You have always the same players on the pitch, on the floor. It's not like basketball. You can decide how many minutes they are playing, more or less. To win the game, but you have starters and backups, and more or less that they're supposed to play from 20 to 35. They're supposed to play from 10 to 15, 20. You got the same amount of time for all of them. So not easy to decide turnovers also, because you cannot play chess with game minutes.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. So about the future. So if you have let's say crystal ball, you're looking for a technology evolution that can solve few of your problems. What you are expecting, which is in your wishing list?
I don't know. In part, the area I think I'm most interested right now, and I've really sort of investigated and sort of really researching and leaning on right now is more like from a cognitive standpoint, right? I want to understand, and I say cognitive, I mean a lot of things that go into that bucket, from actually decision-making processes. And actually, how do not only athletes but coaches, management, how do they actually structure their decision-making process? Because I think that also, as professionals, if I understand that better, I can now help with some of their choices, and I can help, maybe influence, and just really sort of allows me to provide them with the best information. So cognitive. But then if we even go outside of decision-making, then there's decision-making from a true cognitive performance. Like, how can I enhance an athlete's decision-making capabilities, like in situation, right? Like, is that visual? Is it pattern recognition? Is it, things like that? How are athletes learning, and how can I optimize that learning? Because everyone learns a little bit differently.
Also in different level of stress, for example,
Absolutely. How can you deal with that, right? So I put that in cognition, like their mindset. How can you actually deal with, whether it's fear and anxiety of just the situation in general? How can you help an athlete deal with that? Because, again, I'm fortunate enough, as I guess we all are, right, to work with some pretty high level athletes, right? And usually it's not a physical limitation. There's certainly physical limitations, right? Like, there's a difference between LeBron and like, the low man on the totem pole. No question about it. But when you look at the consistency of the elite performers, like, it is not a physical limitation, right? Helping them reach that. And that's what I'm really kind of looking at, is how can you help athletes be more consistent and perform at a higher level? Because it's not like making them stronger, faster, like, that's not what is keeping, holding them back a little bit. I think it's more sort of above the neck, and things like that. And then again, if we talk about the decision making, like I mentioned there with management and coaches, we've all seen coaches it's no question some of the teams that are historically like underperforming and like just poor organizations, like why they are, like the three of us, we know why, right? And it's really trying to help understand why decisions are made in the first place, and then how can we help with that process.
as I was thinking, listening to you, I was thinking that we did start our professional career being strength conditioning coaches. We are not anymore strength conditioning coaches. I don't know what we are. I mean, we are something different. I don't know what.
I agree.
Yeah, because I don't know if it's the experience, like you say, because you say something very important. The physical aspect of performance probably sometimes is the less important. And we have believed for many, many years that it was the main one, because it became from our, let's say, education, for what we are able to manage, You think that what you can do can really influence players, and now we know that it's important. I don't say it's not important at all. Yeah. Absolutely, it's important. You got to take care about your body. But if you're a coach, you're working at the highest professional level, and you're not taking under considerations all the other aspects, your help will be very limited. Okay, so the way you are helping players won't be enough. So you gotta, in any case, sell your product, but at the same time, you gotta take under consideration all the other aspects. So
there's such a human element to what we do, right? It's not just in X's and O's and hey, you're coming in and you're doing this because that's what I said in the, like, that's just not going to work. And certainly not going to have the biggest impact on that athlete. And it's funny you say that about the physical aspect. I sometimes say, and I have to say it, unfortunately, more and more in the corporate setting because, I'm dealing with people who don't really know sport all that well and have never been in the trenches. Mm-hmm. But they'll look at like an unbelievable athlete and they're like, oh, his training must be unbelievable. And like, no. Like no. He or she is actually probably doing that in spite of the training that they're doing, not because of it.
Yeah, can happen. Really, it's... it's the same when I was judging, like you say, we did work with many coaches, and sometimes some of them are really focused on details, like X and O's. They are like, from a technical and tactical standpoint, absolutely well prepared, to everything can happen on the floor. But they're not able to communicate with players, not able to understand, the psychology, the emotional players, and they could be successful. I don't say no, but I've seen many successful coaches. They were not so well prepared, technically speaking, but they did know the human, let's say, behavior better than anybody else. So it's not necessary to have like, having a specialist like a sport psychologist, I don't know, any kind of professional that can help you to manage the information and the knowledge is important. But it's also your personal process. If I'm thinking from the first year, so I'm trying to make this comparison because we have a lot of young listeners. So in my first years, my career, I was trying to manage all my education process, more or less. Now I'm really focused not on what I know, but what I'm looking. Okay, trying to find solutions. It's a completely different approach. Yep. And I don't know what will be in the future. We are still surfing this wave in the way we are doing so far. So another question that could be interesting to share with our listeners, and in somehow we did talk already, but I want to underline this aspect because I really believe that is very important for them. Our young, listeners, we have many students, many young coaches, and all of them are digital natives, so differently from us, okay? So their inclination is to consider technology, from day first. And like you say before, you got the experience to decide what's helping, what can help you, so what is helping you, and what is not helping, what is necessary or what is not necessary, but which kind of advice we can give them, so how they can move in this field, making the right decision without having the experience, to quantify how much help a kind of technology can bring them. I don't know if the question is clear, So you have knowledge to decide what can help you.
Sure.
But if you have not experienced, more difficult. So what can they do? They're gonna try, okay, like learning by doing, or I don't know.
I think learning by doing on yourself is always like one of the best teaching tools, right? So I think there is an aspect of like, we can talk about it all day long, but until you actually do it, like you're not going to know. Again, one of my athletes, he and his wife are due with twins here in a couple weeks, and they're asking me all sorts of parenting questions. I have 2 boys myself, and I'm like, hey guys, I can give you all the advice in the world, but until you do it, there's nothing I can say. So there's definitely something to actually just putting into practice. But I think prior to that, what I wish I had done more of early on in my career is really just put, my thoughts on paper for me, not for anything else, but what do I believe in? Right? Like there is a fundamental, right? Like even if they're young and they're early on, coach in their career, like they've gone through schooling and they've learned some things and maybe they have a small amount of experience. And again, we know that like what you learn in a classroom is nothing like what happens in the real world, but that takes time to understand that. But I wish I had spent time to really outline what it is I believed, right? In the different aspects of my philosophy on my approach to training. And I think that, I started to do that, early on in my career, but I wish I had done it even earlier, right? Because it helped me get pretty clear on what was important to me, like what I really valued, and then how I was going to best achieve that for my athletes. And that exercise, I think, would serve a lot of young coaches and professionals really well because it would help get them clear. And it would also help show maybe some gaps that they need to go work on that they're not as strong in. If it's important to them, right? Like if I identify something is really important to me, but then I can have some genuine self-awareness and reflection that like, wow, that is important to me, but I'm not that good at that. I need to go get good at that, right? I need to go improve my skill set in that. But then I think, if we then switch it to technology, I think having that as a foundation for you then allows you to at least start the thinking about technologies a little bit differently. Right? As opposed to blindly like, oh, look at this one, look at this one. Like if I have something like my philosophy down, I've got it out of my head, I can now filter. And now as I grow in experience, like that can change for sure. But at least you're starting in the best possible place, even with limited experience.
Interesting. This is very interesting, and you're talking about your performance process. We are working the performance world, but the example that you was bringing right now was an example of your performance process. So you like coach, okay, as to think how you can increase your performance like your players.
Yep.
So it's not just a question of players' performance, but also coaches' performance. So you gotta consider which is your best performance. So you gotta criticize yourself. You gotta judge yourself. You are you gotta be aware about what is working well, what is not working well.
I do it every year, right? Like, and this is something that I started back in Toronto, right? Like every year I would review the year and review myself. What went well, what didn't go well. I would actually have my athletes review me as well. I'm like, hey, what worked? What did you think didn't work? Like, what could I do better? What could we as an organization do better? And then from then, like, okay, now I can learn something, right? It's not just like, okay, flip the calendar and now we're in a new season, like, and I just like, copy and paste the same thing I did last year. Like, I always want to get better. I do that, now in my setting, same thing. I go through the same process. I'm about to, one of my athletes just won the Super Bowl on Sunday, which was fantastic.
Great for you. Congratulations.
But thank you. But with all of my athletes, like he'll come back, this week, and we'll sit down and we'll do like a full on review of the season, of his season, of my work with him. What I think went well, what I didn't, same thing. But then if I take it up outside of the individual athlete or team, like I do it on different topics too, right? Like, and if there's something that I see as an area of interest, right now I'm fortunate because half the year I roll up my sleeves and I'm hands in with athletes right? And then they go back to their respective teams. And while I still oversee and work with them, I don't have to deal with the day-to-day, right? So I can now half the year really go down and explore a topic like I talked about, right, from a decision-making or cognition. Like I have that freedom. When you're in it on a day-to-day basis on a team, like that does get tough, right? Because you're just in the grind of a season. But that's one thing I think I'm fortunate of now is I can, as I step back and review my year, I also see areas I want to explore. And then I go learn on it. Because again, you said it when we started, right? Like if you're really passionate about this as a profession, like it is a nonstop learning. I think you could say that about anything, right? Regardless of what profession you worked in, if you're really passionate about it, you want to always learn and get better.
There are, this is very important approach because many coaches, they won a league, they won a championship, or they are working with successful athletes. They don't put them under criticism. They think that what they are doing is absolutely perfect. And you remind me what I used to say to my students when they are asking me how I consider success in our job. I like to quote Winston Churchill, when he says that that success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. So you got to take under consideration that sometimes what you are doing is not perfect, and you got to criticize yourself. You got to be the judge of yourself and not waiting others' judgment.
Absolutely.
If you judge yourself also negatively, it says, look, I got to do this part of my job in a better way because it's not enough. So this is, in my opinion, something that has to be underlined. That could be a big advice to all the young listeners that we have in our podcast. So Alessandro, if you want to take the last question to Keith. We are running. We are not running late, but we are almost at the end of our podcast. So we like to respect times and.
No, today I just want to be general because I think we have been really exhaustive talking about this subject of today, but. You have experienced many things in your career, so I want to be general in my question today. Just asking you, to a young strength conditioning coach, we have many young conditioning coaches that are approaching this job. So, what do you think are the best tips you could give to a beginner in our job, in our field? Not just talking about technology, but talking about how to approach at our job.
Cuzzo hit upon it a little while ago. The human aspect of what we do cannot be understated. And if I was giving advice, and I have, right? Like I talk to young coaches just starting out, and they ask me a very similar question to that, right? And I think they think I'm going to tell them like, oh, go read this book about training. And that's nothing like I ever tell them. Like, go read books and learn about communicating. Learn about like interpersonal skills and those things, because that will, like, I'm not saying you ignore the technical aspect of our job, right? Like you have to have that. But what will allow you to maximize that and the impact of that technical is your ability to work with people. And that is the best advice I could give to a young, it doesn't matter the business, but certainly ours, is go get really, really good at working with people, right? And because you will have a much more successful career and have a lot more impact with the athletes and the people you work with if you're able to do that well. And then that to me is something that I've, fortunate from an early age, like I've always been interested in that stuff. And, I can remember in high school reading, like how to win friends and influence people, and like all of these sort of interpersonal books, right? These, just because I thought it was interesting, but realizing now, like how impactful that body of work and that information has been in my career, is definitely, I think, helped lend to whatever success someone might say that I've had. It's definitely not, I don't think, because of my technical acumen. It's more because of the way that I work with people.
Thank you, Kit. I really, appreciate your talks, your consideration, and I think you're being a very, very important guest, bringing a lot of knowledge, experience, and wisdom at our podcast. And this is what we were looking for, trying to help our listeners to approach to this professional job that is, in my opinion, the best in the world. That's what I say to my students. You choose the best job in the world. Now go get it. Okay, try to do yourself, the best coach possible, because it's a lifelong process, and you will enjoy. So thanks again, Kit, for your time. And it's great to be in touch with a guy from Portland. So you are in the opposite part of the world. So technology is helping us and supporting us, in the best way for this project. So I wish you all the best for anything you're doing in this period. And I hope to see you soon in this part of the world.
I can't wait to get to that part of the world.
You are Italian roots, man. So you have to come in Italy once in a while, to
It's been too long. It's I mean, you know that is one of my favorite places, if not my favorite place in the world. So I can't wait for things to get back to normal and get over there.
Absolutely. We are trying to to keep our network alive, and we have a lot of projects in mind with Alessandro to develop during summertime. So as this let's say lockdown situation, this outbreak situation will be behind our back, we want to start doing something together and sharing knowledge from all the best coaches in the world. So you will be for sure on the top of our list. So thank you again, Kit.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Kit. Thank you again, Francesco. See you next episode. Bye from Alessandro and all the Performance Lab staff. Have a good night.
Ciao.
Thank you.